house, and that in Switzerland especially it could be bought for money. The case was entrusted to a celebrated Swiss professor, and cost thousands of roubles. The treatment lasted 5 years. Needless to say, the idiot did not become more intelligent, but it is alleged that he grew into something more or less resembling a man. At this stage, P died suddenly, and as usual he had made no will and left his affairs in disorder. A crowd of eager claimants arose, who cared nothing about any last scion of a noble race undergoing treatment in Switzerland at the expense of the deceased as a congenital idiot. Idiot though he was, the noble scion tried to cheat his professor, and they say he succeeded in getting him to continue the treatment gratis for 2 years, by concealing the death of his benefactor. But the professor himself was a charlatan. Getting anxious at last when no money was forthcoming, and alarmed above all by his patient's appetite, he presented him with a pair of old gaiters and a shabby cloak, and packed him off to Russia, 3rd class. It would seem that fortune had turned her back upon our hero. Not at all. Fortune, who lets whole populations die of hunger, showered all her gifts at once upon the little aristocrat, like Kryloff's cloud, which passes over an arid plain and empties itself into the sea. He had scarcely arrived in St. Petersburg when a relation of his mother's, who was of bourgeois origin, of course, died at Moscow. He was a merchant, an old believer, and he had no children. He left a fortune of several millions in good current coin, and everything came to our noble scion, our gaitered baron, formerly treated for idiocy in a Swiss lunatic asylum. Instantly the scene changed. Crowds of friends gathered round our baron, who meanwhile had lost his head over a celebrated demi-mondaine. He even discovered some relations. Moreover, a number of young girls of high birth burned to be united to him in lawful matrimony. Could anyone possibly imagine a better match? Aristocrat, millionaire, and idiot. He has every advantage. One might hunt in vain for his equal, even with the lantern of Diogenes. His like is not to be had even by getting it made to order. "Oh, I don't know what this means," cried Ivan Fedorovitch, transported with indignation. "Leave off, Colia," begged the prince. Exclamations arose on all sides. "Let him go on reading at all costs," ordered Lizabetha Prokofievna, evidently preserving her composure by a desperate effort. "Prince, if the reading is stopped, you and I will quarrel." Colia had no choice but to obey. With crimson cheeks he read on unsteadily. "But while our young millionaire dwelt, as it were, in the Empyrean, something new occurred. One fine morning a man called upon him, calm and severe of aspect, distinguished but plainly dressed. Politely, but in dignified terms, as befitted his errand, he briefly explained the motive for his visit. He was a lawyer of enlightened views. His client was a young man who had consulted him in confidence. This young man was no other than the son of P, though he bears another name. In his youth, P, the sensualist, had seduced a young girl, poor but respectable. She was a serf, but had received a European education. Finding that a child was expected, he hastened her marriage with a man of noble character, who had loved her for a long time. He helped the young couple for a time, but he was soon obliged to give up, for the high-minded husband refused to accept anything from him. Soon the careless nobleman forgot all about his former mistress and the child she had borne him. Then, as we know, he died intestate. P.'s son, born after his mother's marriage, found a true father in the generous man whose name he bore. But when he also died, the orphan was left to provide for himself, his mother now being an invalid who had lost the use of her limbs. Leaving her in a distant province, he came to the capital in search of pupils. By dint of daily toil, he earned enough to enable him to follow the college courses, and at last to enter the university. But what can one earn by teaching the children of Russian merchants at 10 kopecks a lesson, especially with an invalid mother to keep? Even her death did not much diminish the hardships of the young man's struggle for existence. Now, this is the question. How, in the name of justice, should our scion have argued the case? Our readers will think, no doubt, that he would say to himself, P showered benefits upon me all my life. He spent tens of thousands of roubles to educate me, to provide me with governesses, and to keep me under treatment in Switzerland. Now I am a millionaire, and P.'s son, a noble young man who is not responsible for the faults of his careless and forgetful father, is wearing himself out giving ill-paid lessons. According to justice, all that was done for me ought to have been done for him. The enormous sums spent upon me were not really mine. They came to me by an error of blind fortune, when they ought to have gone to P.'s son. They should have gone to benefit him, not me, in whom P. interested himself by a mere caprice, instead of doing his duty as a father. If I wished to behave nobly, justly, and with delicacy, I ought to bestow half my fortune upon the son of my benefactor. But as economy is my favourite virtue, and I know this is not a case in which the law can intervene, I will not give up half my millions. But it would be too openly vile, too flagrantly infamous, if I did not at least restore to P.'s son the tens of thousands of roubles spent in curing my idiocy. This is simply a case of conscience and of strict justice. Whatever would have become of me if P. had not looked after my education, and had taken care of his own son instead of me? No, gentlemen, our scions of the nobility do not reason thus. The lawyer, who had taken up the matter purely out of friendship to the young man, and almost against his will, invoked every consideration of justice, delicacy, honour, and even plain figures. In vain. The ex-patient of the Swiss lunatic asylum was inflexible. All this might pass, but the sequel is absolutely unpardonable, and not to be excused by any interesting malady. This millionaire, having but just discarded the old gaiters of the professor, could not even understand that the young man slaving away at his lessons was not asking for charitable help, but for his rightful due, though the debt was not a legal one; that, correctly speaking, he was not asking for anything, but it was merely his friends who had thought fit to bestir themselves on his behalf. With the cool insolence of a bloated capitalist secure in his millions, he majestically drew a banknote for 50 roubles from his pocket-book and sent it to the noble young man as a humiliating piece of